So, Andrew, lovely to meet you. For the sake of the Hot Topics readership community, could you explain exactly what your responsibilities are, please?
So my responsibilities is to look after all things marketing
Yep.
for Starwood hotels in Western Europe, which covers sort of UK, Ireland, Benelux, down through Spain and Portugal.
Yep.
I look after our circa 60 hotels and responsible for all things brand, marketing, digital and e-commerce.
Fantastic. So, within that, I know that you're responsible for 10 different brands. Bit of a cheeky question to start off with. Do you have a favourite child within those?
Always a popular question. I think the favourite brand depends on your mood and depends on what you're looking for.
Yep.
I love our Aloft brand, and I think our Aloft brand has a great future in the more select serve space, but with a different take on it. Through to brands like Sheraton and Westin, which are fantastic heritage brands who offer a great full service experience.
Yep.
And if you're looking for a more lively weekend, you can never go wrong with the W brand, which is obviously really disruptive in its space. So I love them all, but for different reasons.
Okay. And within that, how do you prioritise? Because you've obviously got a very different, within those brands, different set of customer sets.
Yep.
How do you prioritise attracting new customers versus retaining existing? Because obviously I'm aware you have various loyalty schemes in place.
So I think it's a real balance. We have SPG, Starwood Preferred Guest, which is our loyalty program, which is the red thread that ties all the brands together. So from a loyalty standpoint, we're not solely reliant, but SPG drives a lot of the loyalty activity. And at the same time, it's ongoing communication through the lens of our brands. And the technology space really allows us to do that in more ways than ever, whether it's traditional email, which there are lots of people question email. I'm still a believer in email. I think if email is used correctly and is well executed, it is still a very powerful tool. But obviously the social space is one of the major tools we have to really engage with people on an ongoing basis through the tone and the lens of the brand.
Yeah.
And then again, we are through recruitment. We typically are recruiting at a brand level. So we're recruiting people through our brand activities and through our properties in a very much a branded way. So we do want to have distinct guest experiences in each of our hotels, but at the same time you have the consistency and you have the red thread that is SPG tying all of our hotels together to kind of make our customers feel comfortable and valued.
Okay, so staying with that sort of theme of customer value, humour me for a minute and pretend that, as in the good old days when you and I started, the purchase funnel was a very linear process, which of course, as we both know, is far from that now. How much weight do you hold in the various levels of the purchase funnel now? If it were that old traditional
one. That's a really hard one. I think you have to remember the principles that were always there. I think you can very quickly get lost and you can quickly forget that core behaviour is still the same. There's just lots of noise and disruption through that process.
Yeah.
And when we look at our business, you have to always go back to the fact that we are a hospitality business, and you have to go back to the guest. So if it's working for the guest, then it's typically a lot of elements are going to work for the guest now. So you have to remember that things change and the market evolves, and as I say, disruption and noise comes in, but the guest is ultimately still looking for comfort through the process. Therefore, the age-old ways are the same. Like, we have all sorts of technology now that we at different touch points through the customer journey, through the stay, but ultimately they are all tying back to giving a fantastic customer experience. And what we try and do differently is make that experience have a consistent branded element and as personalised as possible.
So does that mean that you think marketing and the basic sort of tenets behind the principles of marketing are as they were decades ago?
I wouldn't say as decades ago, because I think digital obviously is was a complete game changer, and all the talk now is obviously that purpose is going to be the next game changer. So I think that those fundamental shifts have an effect, but I think the premise that people go through discovery, consideration, selection, experience, recommendation, I don't think that moves. Now, the way they're doing it does change, and I think the fundamental shift of digital means that people typically start in the digital space, but now more than ever rely on recommendation. So we know that recommendation outstrips advertising as a power tool of influence hugely. So I think the boxes remain, but what's in the boxes really does change.
And do you have a capability of measuring that level of recommendation? Because one of the things that I think marketers often struggle with is having appropriate KPIs that resonate with other stakeholders in the business.
Yes, so we do, and I think again, tying back to the fact we're a hospitality business and we're essentially about guest experience. And if I look at your kind of question around how things have changed over the years, if we wind back the clock, that the way that guest experience was measured has changed massively. But
very much
the view of the customer is still the ultimate measurement in a hospitality business. So what I try and do, and we try and do as marketeers, is apply metrics which the operators can relate to. So even when we're working in the digital space, we try and make the metrics as understandable as possible. And if you're looking at consideration, Starwood was the first to introduce unfiltered reviews on our own website. So we were the first company who allowed guests who stayed to rate us, and then we published those, obviously with a filter around appropriate language, etc. To make sure there's a barometer against the likes of TripAdvisor, because typically recommendation is judged globally by TripAdvisor or Booking.com, but those are often people who maybe haven't stayed and have an opinion. So, it's finding those balance points and making use of sort of crowdsourced data points against your own data points to make sure typically you see a correlation, but it's important that you've got both sides to be able to marry them up.
Agreed. So if you've touched on using customers as sort of extended external brand ambassadors almost. How within your role on a pan-EMEA basis do you get internal employees to do the same?
So I've been with Starwood 2 and a bit years, and I think one of the absolute strengths of the approach we have is that we have a very strong culture around internal activation. So we have clearly defined brands, we activate those brands with our associates and our team in a similar way to the way we activate them with our guests. So any campaign that we're doing, the campaign will have an internal component to rally the associates who are delivering the brand, to make sure that they understand where they're trying to take their customer. And wherever possible, if we have an activation which involves customer experience, we allow our associates to experience it like a guest. So they're able to really communicate that, because again, they are our strongest asset and our strongest advocate, because they are having daily conversations.
It sounds like your approach is sort of aspiring to be as authentic as a brand as you possibly can.
I think the brands are. It depends by brand. Obviously, some brands are pushing more in trying to be more defined than others. But authenticity and being believable is key, because I think once you become too gimmicky, people switch off and you don't have longevity.
Agreed. Slightly different tack. So if I were asking you to sort of roll the clock back and pretend, I'm assuming you're over 30, pretend that you're your 30-year-old self.
Okay.
What advice would you give to yourself as an up-and-coming marketer, knowing what you now know?
I think you need to stick to your principles, but be open-minded. So there is so much noise out there at the moment. Like if you acted on every article you see, every piece of advice, every new piece of tech, you would achieve nothing because you'd be going round and round. So I think you need to really understand where you're trying to go as an organisation, where you're trying to take yourself, most importantly where you're trying to take your team, have your journey in mind and the fundamentals of how you want to get there, and then look to see what can support this. Now I'm not saying you're narrow-minded and you don't observe changes in market and changes in trend, but you have to have clear priorities. And I think the other one would be, I think social is taken off in a way which people didn't expect it to. I think it was not that long ago that all the articles were that Facebook is dead.
Yeah.
And now you look at what Facebook has become, and it's key now. It's capturing more and more share of spend. So you need to take on what's out there, but not be too obsessed. And equally, really pick what's right for you. And I think if I look at again the fortunate position I'm in with all the brands we have, is that something like the emergence of Snapchat actually is really right for some of our brands. For other brands, at the moment, it isn't right because it's not attracting an audience type who are going to interact with it. However, 5 years, maybe even 2 years, it might be that Snapchat is universally used and it can be applicable for all brands. So you really need to pick evolving technologies and evolving trend which is right for you, rather than trying to do everything. And there's so many examples of brands trying to force behaviour, and the minute you try and force behaviour, I think you have a real challenge.
Yeah. So, speaking of other brands, which other brands or sectors do you get your inspiration from? So is there any other company out there where you would say, I'd quite happily steal with pride some of their approaches or creative ideas?
I think sector-wise, still having worked, was agency side in FMCG, I still really like to watch what's happening in the FMCG space, because I think that there's a very, product marketing has a very different approach, and I think that as a hospitality company we instill much more product marketing than most other hospitality and travel-based businesses do. And I think I particularly still like what a lot of the alcohol brands do. I think Red Bull are a standout when it comes to activation and owning a property. Like this whole anything extreme, if there isn't a Red Bull logo on it, you feel cheated that they're not there. So they have really taken ownership. And we are quite focused on using events. Okay. So again, I like to kind of see what's happening, and I'm a big sports fan. So the way that sports companies sports companies and sports properties use their stars, and they use the equity of people, is something which really interests me and inspires me. And I think also the new companies, like even today I was chatting about a startup which is trying to be the Uber of the private jet space. Now that's, you have to look at these, niche, but you can see where they're going. And I think that all the new sort of entrepreneurial startups, there are elements that you can use and just take little nuggets of inspiration from.
So Red Bull, I think, is a fascinating example, and I would describe them as a very brave brand. This year's Marketing Society theme for the UK, and I'm familiar that you're not just responsible for the UK, but this year's Marketing Society theme is about being brave. What's the bravest thing you've ever done as a marketer?
I think having the confidence to say stop and say, let's look at all these things which we do every day, and let's be bold and let's find 50% of them we're going to say we're going to stop doing, and which will typically turn out to be 25%. But the bread and butter, which you do every day and everyone expects you to do, but deep down you know isn't really doing anything anymore, stop doing it, and all the people around you will be aghast. How can you stop doing it? We've always done that. But saying stop, let's find time to focus either on what we have confidence is right, or we find time to do new things. Like, I'm a big believer in the 70-30 rule, probably, where I say let's focus 70% on the things we know work and we know has bread and butter, will deliver, etc. And let's find 30% of our time to try things. And if it's going to go wrong, fail fast, move on.
So very much the sort of Google approach.
Yeah, and be proud of it, and if it's gone wrong, it's not a bad thing, because if things aren't going wrong, you're not trying hard enough. You know, you're not trying hard enough. You're not pushing boundaries, and I think that there's more of an acceptance of that way of working. But in more traditional businesses, and hospitality is still probably relatively traditional. You know, it takes time to kind of build that culture, to have that confidence.
So within that, if you're happy to share it, this whole sort of concept and culture of failing fast and learning and moving on.
Yeah.
What's the biggest failing that you've experienced, and what did you learn by it?
I suppose actually, just looking back over the last few years, is not jumping on the opportunity in the social space.
Okay.
And that's across multiple examples of where probably hung back and wasn't that convinced that it was going to keep growing at the pace it has, and therefore suddenly you find that you're a bit behind the curve, and you need to then, I think the people who went in quite heavily in building communities well, not just anyone, but well, find themselves in a really fortunate position now, because they're not having to spend huge amounts of money buying communities. And that's not applicable to this role, but just general work and approach over the last few years is not getting into that space quicker, I think, is something I wish I'd got there sooner, to be honest.
Okay. So if you were advising a young marketer now, getting into the marketing profession for their first time, what advice would you give them, given what you've just said about the pace of change and getting into social earlier and so on?
I think I need to be difficult in case too many of my guys see this, but make moves. You know, I think different organisations, different sectors is a good thing, and I think the early part of your career you should be informing yourself and experiencing different ways. Get outside your comfort zone. You know, do things which you don't feel comfortable in, because if you're not comfortable, you're learning a lot quicker than when you are comfortable. But I would really say, you know, this open-minded and try different areas, and don't necessarily think that this is right for me. You know, try something more online focused. Try something more traditional. Obviously, those lines are blurring, but there are still more traditionally led roles out there, and really understand what's right for you. And I think that cross-sector piece is important. And I think the last one is, I really think a bit of agency time and a bit of client time is a good thing, because you definitely learn different skills, approaches, and mindset from the two different environments.
And given that, how do you, client side now, think you get the best out of your agencies?
I think a combination of some understanding / sympathy, and
for the pressures they're under?
Yeah, for the pressures they're under, and the knowledge that an agency isn't, you know, an office full of people who just sit there and have these magical might. You know, it's not a dark art. You know, it takes time, and ultimately an agency cannot perform without the right brief. And you know, we do a lot of work around, you know, sort of, talk about basics of teaching, and I'm a real believer in teaching teams how to work with agencies, because You're not.
It's refreshing.
You are not going to get good work if the brief's poor.
Yeah.
And I think that so I have that sympathy, and at the same time, knowing when you're maybe not, knowing when you're trying to be spun something and being able to cut straight through and say, actually, no, let's, go back, let's do it again. That clearly hasn't had enough time invested into it. So it's that double edge really. So it's, I say, a sympathetic mind, but equally really knowing when you're getting value. And I think once you've spent a bit of time in agency, you can judge agencies through pitch processes much better, and you know what to look for. And I think it just helps you understand the space better.
Interesting. What do you want your legacy to be as a marketer?
That's a tough one. Hopefully, I've got a few more years of doing it to create one.
Yes.
Hopefully, I think somebody, again, I just go back to this sort of open-minded, and I suppose my legacy is probably more the people I leave behind. I'm really focused on teams, and I don't want to be somebody who is up collecting awards every week and what a great campaign. I want to be somebody who's made marketing a function that is key to whatever business I'm working with. It's not seen as
Colouring department.
The colouring department. It's not seen as the people who you can't pin down, who don't contribute to commercial success. So I want to be seen as somebody who delivers great ideas, challenges, represents the customer, represents the guest, and really leave, wherever I go, leave things in a sustainable way with great people taking it forward further.
Last question. 3 words to describe your leadership style that will enable that legacy.
My leadership style. So I am 3 words to describe my leadership style. Empowering, supportive and challenging.
Brilliant. Andrew, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you very much.